G'day and welcome to the Detour podcast. Today we're going to be chatting with a guy who I saw come up through the junior ranks and take on the world. Phil Anderson was the first non-European to wear the coveted maillot jaune. So before Phil, we had Sir Hubert Ottman, Oppie, and Russell Mockridge, and they were probably the first Aussies to make the Europeans sit up and take notice. But it was Phil who really shook the Europe to the roots of their traditional values. He changed the way that the Western world were viewed by the pretty staid cycling community. He was a world-class cyclist when most Australians didn't even know what was going on in Europe, and laid the groundwork for the next generation. So, good morning, Phil, and how are you in sunny Apollo Bay?
Well, it's just come overcast since you came on, mate. It's very cloudy out there, but I've already been out for a run this morning. It's always good down here. I really feel like I'm treating life, especially with this COVID. But no, it's very good, mate.
And I guess you're about to go on one of your marathon rides that you do around the Otways as well. So you've been running, and now do you do any swimming, mate? You might be starting triathlon.
No, only when it gets steamy in summer, I get down the beach, which is right across the road. But she's pretty fresh this time of year.
Yeah, no, sounds good, mate. So look, I'll introduce our sponsors because without our great sponsors, we wouldn't have a podcast. So firstly, Bike Exchange, where the world buys, sells, learns and rides. Bike Exchange, where a bike is never just a bike. And at the moment, Phil, as you would know, bike sales have gone through the roof. And you walk into a bike shop, it's hard to even buy a bike. So the best place to jump online is Bike Exchange. Matter of fact, I did it on the weekend because I had a mate who was after a really good mountain bike and he just couldn't find anything. So I got onto the Bike Exchange website, bang, bang, and I've got him a ripper. He's got to go into Mexico, as I say, into Melbourne to get it. Yeah, fantastic. And of course, we've got Let's Go Motorhomes. Get out and explore your backyard. Hire a Let's Go motorhome or camper van, and for your next great escape, take the bikes along with you, which of course you can do. You must see plenty of Let's Go Motorhomes and Jayco Motorhomes down the Great Ocean Road, mate.
Yes, not so many right now because of lockdown, but there are still some motorhomes down here. They have to be country people, I guess, because we aren't locked down, fortunately. But no, normally it's it'd possibly be Australia's most frequented by the camping car set, and no better way than to do it with a Let's Go motorhome.
Exactly. And if you had your wish list, mate, if you had a Let's Go motorhome, where would you head? What would be your bucket list place to go?
Well, every Victorian, especially this time of year, wants to go north, get out of the cold, and the outback is freezing this time of year. So to find any sort of decent climate, you have to stay reasonably close to the on the eastern side of the divide, and so it'll take you up to northern New South Wales and the Queensland. But of course, at the moment, you'd be faced with isolating yourself for a couple of weeks before you can go anywhere when you head north. But
exactly.
No, I think most Victorians want to head north this time of year.
So, and our other partner is Lexus Blackburn, who have been a great sponsor of cycling. They've sponsored the Women's Herald Sun Tour for the last 2 years, and the Bay Crits for the last 2 years. Lexus Blackburn Bay Crits. The Moore family, wonderful people, love their cycling. They came to the Tour de France, Andrew, Sarah and Bethany, a couple of years back. So they've had a detour experience, you might say, and loved it. So, and they're still involved, which shows how gritty they really are. We just mentioned about how people can't get out from Melbourne. How are you handling life with the pandemic, mate?
Well, normally this time of year, of course, I'm in Europe hosting tours over there. But now I'm, with lockdown. Other than that, my life hasn't changed that much. I feel very fortunate that Annie and I, we live in a beautiful spot. We're not craving to get out. We can still get out and exercise, which is the main thing, and even travel around wherever we want, country Victoria. There was a break between in the COVID lockdown, and we got up to the north, up to the Murray, and I did a bit of gravel riding, a bit of pack rafting, which is a bit fun, and but really, hasn't been too bad. I feel very fortunate, as I say, and my heart goes out to those people that have been suffering, not just with COVID, but also those people that have suffered with the lockdown. It affects people in many different ways, and a lot of people haven't got a job. Stuck in a confined space, not only here in Australia, across all around the world. But no, for me, I feel very lucky getting out, exercising, get to ride a couple of times a week. Not always alone, which is nice, with a few mates. Socially distancing, of course. But no, it's been great.
So, the European season has started for the ladies. I see Annemiek van Vleuten won all three of the one-day races in Spain, and the guys get away with a 5-day tour in the Basque Country in Spain. Starts in a couple of days' time. So, what are your thoughts on how that's going to go in Europe, mate?
Oh, look, I don't know. It's moving all the time regarding the COVID situation, and even now I heard overnight there's looks like Spain could be going to a second lockdown, which with the first men's event coming up, I think starting this weekend, that could be. We'll have to see what happens there, but it's a very difficult situation right now. Obviously the teams and the event organisers are throwing everything at it and trying to make it a COVID safe situation. But the only time you've got spectators and crowds, there's always a threat of cancellation, unfortunately. And so, it'd be great. Like, we all miss cycling and miss our sport, but we want this over, and looking into a crystal ball, who knows where we're going to be in 30 days, let alone in 6 months regarding the sport. So yeah, it's very fluid at the moment. We never know which way it's going to go.
Yes, I think it's fingers crossed by everyone. But we're going to take a step back. I've always believed that it was you and Sean Kelly, Stephen Roach, Greg LeMond, and probably to a lesser extent, a degree, Robert Miller, that changed the way that European hierarchy ran the sport. I raced with you fleetingly in 81 when it was my last year, and I had a couple of little bashes over in Europe. And you were just starting out in your amazing journey. But Australians, anyone from English-speaking countries, were sort of quite rare. I mean, my early mid-70s when I raced over there wasn't 10 English-speaking guys in the whole European peloton. But you guys really changed that. But let's step back to your beginnings in Melbourne. You come out from Pommyland as a youngster, and
very, very young,
very young, and lived in Kew. And you started out with the Hawthorn Bike Club with Dave Sanders' dad, Ted, who was very involved with that club.
Yes, that's right. Not long after I joined the club, Ted took over the presidency of the Hawthorn Club, and I was 16 years old, sort of mid-70s. I was still going to school. I would have been in like year 10, I guess, and I was a pretty average rider. It was very much a hobby rather than a sport for me at that stage. It was just a curiosity of mine, and I slowly put together a bike which was somewhat decent, I'm sure you've got a lot of older listeners there, and it was done a lot different in the old days. You wouldn't just go to a shop and buy a brand new off the shelf bike. You'd put something together from retired riders. Something which today you just find a scrap heap, but back in the day, that's what got new people into the sport. And so I put together a decent bike. My first race back then, it was all handicaps, club handicaps, or into club races. And being the Hawthorn Club, we rode with Carnegie and I think Chelsea Club, Blackburn occasionally. So I started during the road season, and not sure how I got out there. It was out of Berwick or Craigieburn North or somewhere out that way. And it was I was certainly. I mean, I hear stories of the greats Oppie and Sir Hubert Oppam, Sir Hubert, and even Mockridge, and then I've been listening to your podcast, and you listen to O'Grady's story and Robbie's stories, and those guys were like world champions from the moment they got in their bike. But for me, it was nowhere near that. I didn't stun everybody with my prowess on the bike, that's for sure. I wasn't pretty on the bike, and by the time I got to the finish line, everybody had just about packed up and gone home. So it was a slow start. It was a slow start for Phil Anderson.
Yes, I'll tell you what, mate. I got memories of back those early days. It didn't take you long to go from what you were saying to the pointy end. But when I was Googling, I found some interesting stuff, because it was an amazing club you had at Hawthorn, with all the great riders you had there. But Alan Piper, it was also a club mate of yours, and went to Trinity Grammar with you. And he said that his mate was Tom Sawyer, and he and Tom were the rough nuts, and you and your mate Darbo were the two upper class boys, he calls you. So it was funny to read that. But I can remember you racing as a junior. I remember I was looking after Michael Phillips, whose brother was a good racing mate of mine. Michael was a junior, same time as you. I remember going to a junior
boy.
Yeah, boy from Traralgon. And I remember going to a junior test race, like a Victorian title or something like that. And you and Michael were sort of a step above everyone. And Michael had the edge on you in that one, but then you quickly turned that around and become one of the best juniors in Australia. So you went from being the awkward duckling, as you said, to a swan quite quickly, really.
Yeah, well, I think I think Ted Sanders saw how I was not struggling, but didn't have much. I didn't have much direction. I was sort of all over the bike, which I still am. but Ted felt a little bit sorry for me, and took me aside and gave me a few tips for training, and helped source some better bike components, and sort of basically put me on my way. Just he was obviously he had his three sons, John. Big John, Wayne, and Dave. Yeah, Dave. Davo. So, three very talented sons. And Ted was a wonderful man with his, wonderful man, and the team the club really supported him, and the support that he gave me. Ted would take me out to the races, give me a few words of wisdom at the start of a race, and off I would go. And once he started, I won't say training me, but once he started assisting me, I really started showing some mild potential, and then I got into. I started as a junior, and because I was 16 when I started, they were the junior ages, and eventually got on the Victorian team for the Aussie titles, on the road, of course, and then I got second in the nationals, and then I went over to New Zealand. I can't remember. I think that was self-funded. It certainly wasn't like on a scholarship or anything like that. But I went over to New Zealand to the Dulux tour. I think I had the two Sansonettes there as teammates, Sal and Remo, because you can't say these Sansonettes because there's bloody like dozens of them. It's like a dynasty of Sanson. It's like the plank arts in Europe. But anyway, went with those guys, and those guys were my idol. Like I just idolised the Sansonetti brothers, and so I won in New Zealand, and that got me the right to train with the Sansonettis, my teammates.
Well, you won in New Zealand.
So,
the Dulux Tour in New Zealand was a huge bike race, and you were just turned 19, I think. So it was more than just, I won in New Zealand. That was a huge victory.
Yeah, no, it was it was big for me. I think I was still a junior, but anyway, because I got first junior and overall and King of the Mountains and all these bloody things. So it gives you a little bit of confidence, and they gave me the right, as I said, to train with the Sansonettis because they were a pretty close shop over there, the northern suburbs. They were in the Preston Club. And, from there, I didn't look back.
Well, I remember when I first realised just how much potential you had was a test race for the Commonwealth Games, which were in Canada. I think it was a Victorian test race to pick the Victoria team to go to the national titles. And it was a real, pretty rough day. And you went off the front quite early in the race. It was a pretty good circuit round Jindavick there out the back of Druin. And you went away, and in the chasing group with the Sansonettis, as you just mentioned, good rope, all the best Victorians, which were easily the best state back in those days, and they were in a group, and I think they decided to let you dangle out there and wear you down and try and see if that worked. It didn't work because they let you dangle out there. You got a couple of minutes up the road. When they started working hard, you just went harder, and they never ever saw you. I remember standing on the side of the road thinking, wow, now that was something special. What are your memories of that day?
Bloody hard circuit. I remember that, hilly. When you attack strategically, sometimes you just want to go alone, but normally that's in the closing kilometres of the race. But if you go early, you want a couple of other riders to come up with you to share the load a bit. But those buggers just let me hang out there. So at a certain point, I had to fully commit and say, okay, I'm going to go away from these guys. They're not coming up. But I'd heard that they were splintering, and there wasn't too much of a bunch left, towards the end of the race. But I do remember, I think we had 2 test races. The next day we had another one, or maybe it was next weekend. I can't remember, but it was on that same bloody circuit, Jindavick. I remember, I didn't break away like the day before, but I was in the leading group coming towards the finish, in the closing kilometres. And I remember looking down at my fork. I heard a bit of a crack, and I remember looking down at my fork crown, and the fork blade had come apart from the crown. And I'm looking straight into the fork tube. Like I don't know if it was, probably Reynolds tubing. I remember looking down and going, oh, geez, this doesn't look good. We're going uphill at the time, so I just eased right up and climbed off. So of course I won the race, like the previous race, and I thought, geez, I might not get selected, because I'm not going to finish. But I went to the referee or the judge or whatever, commissaire, and told him my ill fate, and he said, "Don't worry, we saw what happened. We saw you climb off, and the mechanic confirmed the bike wasn't much good in the forks." But yeah, tough circuit, and any time anybody talks about Jindavick, I cringe and run the other way because it's a really unforgiving circuit out there. Nuji, all that area up there. Like now, I do a bit of gravel riding, sort of, a little bit north of there. But tough for a road circuit, hilly. Oh, unforgiving.
Well, Karen Jones, who runs a lot of our races, of course, lives virtually on that circuit.
That's right.
Yeah.
So
she would know.
She actually asked me if I wanted to come up and go riding up that way with the family, and I say, no way.
So look, so that got you into the Victorian team, and then you then went really well and got in the Australian team to go to the Commonwealth Games. You're only, I think, 19, just turned 20 when you went to those Commonwealth Games in Vancouver. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. So, four-man team: Sal, Remo, Mike Lindemann, I think, Queenslander, good rider. Mike had won the Australian Championships, which were in Queensland that year, and so he was the fourth man on the team besides myself and the two Santonis. So we headed over to the Com Games. En route, we stopped in Colorado and did the Red Zinger race, which is kind of like the predecessor to the Coors Classic, which is a big event, pro-am event in the 80s. And so, of course, this is the 70s. And that was a good experience. I won a stage there. From there, we went up to Edmonton, to where we were going to be having the Commonwealth Games. And for me, I was very excited. I'd gone through the whole selection process, Jindovic, the Australian Championships, and finally we get up to Canada for this Commonwealth Games. And for me, this was the biggest. Like, I hadn't done a World Championships or an Olympic or anything like that, so for me, this was the biggest event I'd ever done. And for me, this is the Holy Grail. So we had a number of training events before, which I went well in. They're good, those training races, because you can see who you're going to be racing up against on the big day. So, I could see the English, the Kiwis, of course. I'd met some of them the year previous when I did that deluxe tour. And, and I had some great teammates in the Sansonettes who I knew very well at this stage. I didn't know much about this Lindemann bloke. I hadn't raced against him other than the Aussie Championships, but he seemed a strong rider and great personality. And so, so we started the race. I think it was dry in the beginning of the day. It was on the final day of the Commonwealth Games. So, we had to live like monks through the whole Commonwealth Games. I think they go for 10 days or 12 days. And finally, on the last day, we had this road race. And I just remember turning up the start line, and you got riders of all nationalities. Like Australia wasn't really a cycling nation back then, but there were many other countries and jerseys there that I didn't even recognise. That further down the ranking than Australia. Countries like India and Gibraltar and countries which you couldn't name one rider from. So anyway, I looked around and I knew the Kiwis, I knew the British riders, and I think the strength of the event was in those two teams, together with a sprinkling of Canadians. So we take off and half the field's dropped in lap one. We certainly weren't first forcing the pace, but there's a flurry of attacks, and it was basically up and down this freeway. Pretty boring circuit, and at the turnaround, you did a little bit of a loop off the freeway, but anyway, coming into I think it was the second last lap. It started raining sort of mid-race, and then coming into the final lap, the 15-kilometre lap, there was I think there was only about half a dozen of us left, and there was I don't know if I fell first or somebody fell on this bloody corner. The road was like a skating rink. And, rider fell in front of me. I tripped over him, went down, slid across the road, and there was only three riders who stayed upright. So, I'm sliding along sort of on my knees, and I'm sort of seeing the gold medal right away. And, myself and the other two guys get up, and we chase. And we chase and get back. And I think it was, I can't remember if Sal and Remo were there, which would have been a pretty good situation. But we caught back up again to the front, and then came to the sprint. And I can't remember the details of it, although there is a video floating around on YouTube, I think, somewhere, which I haven't spent the time to watch, but I possibly should have in preparation for this. But I won the sprint. I think it was like
I think
five
there
or
was
six.
only
Five.
I think there was only 3 left at that stage. I remember watching it actually because it was live back in Aussie, and when you went down, I thought, oh no! But you caught the. I think you're already down to 3, so the Sansandies weren't there at that stage, and you caught them up quite quickly. I can't think of the name of the Kiwi. He was a fairly good bike rider, but was it Bell? Yeah, but
Could have been Bell. Yeah,
yeah,
I think it was
and
Bell. Bell,
yeah, and
Harvey, and myself. I think Harvey got second, or maybe
yeah.
it was Bell that got second. I can't remember, but yeah, we
And,
are
and
talking 40 years
you
ago.
romped the sprint in actually, so it was a great gold medal.
Yeah, well, I'll take it. That's for sure. Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, you look at everything that you've done over your career, and the Com Games. It's very important for those inside the Commonwealth, but outside of the Commonwealth, it may as well be it doesn't rank up there with outside of the Commonwealth as a huge achievement. But look, I'll take anything I can, and it was for me. It was the biggest event I'd won, and something which they actually televised here in Australia, which it's the only time they televised anything from the sport of cycling was the Commonwealth Games and the Olympics. There was otherwise certainly nothing live. You'd never see the Tour de France or anything. Back in the 70s, you'd never see anything like that. So great.
So from there, you quickly you decided to go to Europe. You went to ACBB, the big amateur team that's sort of part of the Peugeot Pro team at the time. So how did that come about?
Well, in my club, we had there's a spider or something crawling in here. In the Hawthorn Club, besides Ted Sanders, we also had another great supporter of the guys, and that was Gerald George. Now you might remember Gerald because I'm sure you went down to his restaurant La Chaumière in North Melbourne back in the day. They used to have Mad Mondays? I think it was.
Yeah, huge.
Where
huge.
a lot of the pros, you got to remember I was still an amateur back then, so we didn't mix. But I heard stories of a lot of pros would go down there and take advantage of his generosity and his wonderful cuisine and his wine selection. But anyway, Gerald was on the Hawthorn Club, and he'd seen what I'd done in the Commonwealth Games and see what a persistent, stubborn old young bloke I was, and he'd spoken to a friend of his who had a club in Paris. He was like the director of a team in Boulogne-Billancourt, which is a suburb of Paris. Spoken to Mickey Vigan about me, and would he consider taking on board a young Australian kid that had just shown some talent in the Commonwealth Games, but also in the local scene here in Australia. And he agreed that he'd have a place on the team. So Gerald came to me and asked me if I'd be interested in coming across, and he said if I committed to it, he'd buy me a ticket to come over and to ride on this club in Paris for a few months. So that was my introduction. That was my invitation to go and join a club. Of course, later years, the pathways changed. Of course, it's always come through Cycling Australia or through the AIS pathway. But back then it was different. And you speak to Alan Piper or riders before me, and there were many great riders before me. Everybody has a different story of how they got over there. But mine was through the generosity and connections that Gerald George had.
So you then, that was 79. So then in 80 you signed on with Peugeot Pro Team, which meant not going to the Olympics in 1980. So was that a hard decision for you to make?
Well, it was because, obviously got a medal in the Commonwealth Games, and after the Com Games back then, the the next best thing or better would be to go to the Olympics, represent the country. But both these events, the Olympics and the Commonwealth Games, were amateur events. And if you'd signed for a professional team, then you basically forfeited your chances to represent your country in the Com Games and the Olympics. Of course, it's all changed now, but back then, unfortunately, that's what the rules were. So I went over there, joined an amateur team, did very well as an amateur in Paris, and won a heap of races. And I think I barely spoke the language. God knows how I got all those results, but I just blossomed in that foreign environment. I was on this very strong club, the ACUB, and did really well. And like you said, by the end of the year, I did have an invitation, or had a couple of teams approach me. One was the Peugeot team, which my club was actually connected to, as you pointed out, but also the Mercier team, the Miko team, the other French team. So, so through caution of the wind, throughout my because when you're over there and you see, like in Australia, I mean, you're a pro here, and I used to idolize the likes of John Tavaro and the heroes, the McVillies and these guys. You'd watch them in the Sun Tour every year. I think it's always around October or, a miserable time of the year to be racing in Australia, but you watch the race then. And I mean, I rarely got out to the event, but I used to keep the clippings on my, it always used to be the center of the Sun back then. It was called the Sun. Guys cut out those cuttings, and I have photograph of John Navarro, posting it at the final stage, Criterion or something. I used to have these posters on my wall, so I knew what the a little bit about the pro scene here in Australia. But when I went over there, racing as an amateur, I remember one of my first images of seeing the professional peloton was just going. They had the prologue of the Paris-Nice just down the street where I was living. I was there as an amateur. This is '79. I remember going around the corner, going down there, and I was like a kid in the candy store, looking at these these professional riders. Looking at Jan Russ or Jerry Kneedman warming up for the prologue, seeing Bernard Hinault, winner of the Tour de France, and these guys were like bigger than life, and and they were basically in my backyard, and it was quite a bit different than going down watching the prologue of the Sun Tour around well, before it wasn't called Fed Square, but around town. Yes. in Melbourne, and I thought, geez, this is unbelievable. This, to be a pro, would be huge. And so by the end of the year, these teams were coming to me and asking me if I wanted to sign up, and I didn't know whether I'd ever get this chance again, because to stay amateur, go back to Australia, possibly have to ride out at Jindervik again, that bloody place, to get on the Victorian team, to get on the Australian team. Then you go to the Olympics to get your ass kicked by a bunch of Russians or East Germans or something, and I'd possibly be dead and buried and wouldn't have a chance to ever ride pro again. So through caution of the wind, gave up any chance of representing my country as an amateur again, and signed a pro contract. Yeah, so that was a decision we had to make back then. As I said, well, it's become a cliche. It's all changed now, but all for the better.
Eyes on Bikes help grow small businesses. We are the world's #1 bike marketplace, where buyers and sellers are brought together in a place where a bike is never just a bike. Bike Exchange, where the world buys, sells, learns, and rides.
Well, mate, this is fantastic that actually we're getting you to talk about this stuff. But we've got a lot to go through, because when you Google your career, there's pages and pages of stuff pops out, and I remember it well, of course. Now, I remember in 1981, I come over the last minute to got an invitation to ride the Giro, and I remember a couple of races with you in Belgium. I was carrying a little bit of weight, and I wasn't going that well, but I remember you. I remember one. because we were leaving the next week to go to Italy for the Giro, I wanted to give myself a hard ride. I got up the road and a little break, and I was really struggling. You come roaring past. I remember thinking, wow, this kid's got a bit of horsepower there. So I went and rode that Giro, but you then rode your first Tour de France. So tell us about that lining up in your first Tour de France in 1981.
Well, yeah, I was I? I'm just trying to think if I was the only non-Frenchman on the team. So I knew the teams back then, they were not as big as what they are now. Back then, a big team would be 20 riders, 18 riders, 20 riders. It was quite a bit different. So there's a certain amount of, just like now, a certain amount of riders were going to miss out on the tour. And, the riders, a lot of the riders on the team had ridden the Tour de France before, and you'd sit around the table at dinner listening to them banging on about this Tour de France, about the distances, the size of the fields, the 3 weeks, the fatigue that sets in. Everybody made a big fuss about it, but they all said it was the most important event of the year. So for me, I knew it was critical, because back in Australia there wasn't that much. You couldn't find any information about the Tour de France. Like, I barely heard about it. I'd heard about it when I was studying. When I was at school, learning French. I think everybody had to learn French, do 2 years of, I think it was Form 1 and 2. So I knew a little bit of French. But and in the French class, I remember our French master talking about the Tour de France. We were talking about the culture of this European nation, talking about the Tour de France a little bit. But I certainly wasn't a stellar French student, or I was barely listening when he mentioned the Tour de France. I guess my ears picked up. But this was before I was racing, or even thought. I don't even know. Well, I only just got my first bike, I think, by the time I was, in Form 1. Anyway, so I knew a little bit about the Tour de France. I was going well. I'd started my career, had sort of started showing some results as a pro, winning some smaller races leading into the Tour de France. I was possibly, Peugeot was a strong team, but 81, I started winning some races. I think I'd won the Tour de Lourdes. I won a stage in the Paris-Nice early on. So I was possibly one of the better riders in the team, but I was certainly, I would have been, I was brought on board as a domestic for the tour team. And we'd had our team leader at the first Tour de France was going to be Jean-René Bernard, who of course was a great rider. He was instrumental in Bernard Hinault winning the Tour the year before, or the year before that. A very strong rider, French champion. And so he was going to be our team leader. And, my job on the team was basically, chief bloody bottle washer, and, there to help Jean-René if he needed a bottle, or if he needed somebody to push him while he's having a piss or something. My job was only pushing him if it was a strong crosswind uphill, I think. You get covered in urine. But anyway,
but that all changed, didn't it? That all changed quite dramatically up in the Pyrenees, on the Plat d'Uté, I think is the way you say that. So tell us about that stage, because everything changed from that day, your whole career.
Yeah, like stage 4 was a team time trial, finishing in Carcassonne, and the Peugeot team, we got second. We had some strong riders there with Duc de Salle, of course, Jean-René Bernard. We had Michel Laurent, Bossis, Jacques Bossis. We had some very strong riders there, and we put in a good team time trial. So the rally team of Ras and Kniedemann won the time trial. So being early on in the race, it was stacked. So you'd have, the first 8 riders were rally riders. Then after that, you had, you had the Peugeot riders. So I was already in the top 20, but that was just, through circumstances, our team did well in the team time trial. So day 5, the next day, was into the Pyrenees. And, other than Jean Rene, we didn't have any really top climbers. There was Michel Leroy, who was a reasonable climber. But, for me, around the breakfast table that morning, the guys are really fretting, I don't think any of them slept much, with the prospect of going to the mountains this day in the Pyrenees. So I remember, it was no secret where the mountains are. Back then, we didn't have GPS units or radios where the directors are yelling in your ear. You used to have these cards, and I think they still actually get the cards. I don't know if the riders use them, but it's like a little business card for each day, and it has the profile of the stage with different points along it. Where the sprints are and the feed stations and stuff like that. There's no secret where the mountains are. We knew after 45 k's we're going to go to the first hill, the first mountain, which is like, I don't know, the Pyrisud or something like that. And I remember the bunch going along at such a pace, and it was flat, like it was pancake flat, and we're racing along like 60 k's an hour. And I'm thinking, geez, where are these mountains starting? And I see a teammate over the other side of the road, the other side of the bunch. And I sort of, where are these mountains? It's like I can't see any mountains yet. And I'm sort of looking across all the heads of the riders up the road, and he said, no, you're looking at the wrong place. You got to look up above the heads. And I look up, like towards the sun, and suddenly through the clouds, I could see, there was kind of a cloudy day. You could just kind of see the peaks poking out, and you could just see, like these switchbacks going up the side of this mountain. We were actually only like a couple of kilometres from a right-hand turn where we're going to turn onto a laneway at the start of this bloody climb. So I just buried my head and, tried to make my way towards the front. But, everybody was doing that, and that's why we were going so bloody fast. But I think I went up about 3 places, and that was it, So I went around that first corner in about 100th position. And but I noticed after a couple of kilometres of this grade, I don't know, it was like 8 to 10%. And we just, didn't seem to slow down much once we got to that climb. There were some gaps opening, and I found myself sort of bridging up all the time. And finally, we get to the top of the first climb, and from 180 guys, we went down to like 100. Like the field is just already in half, and it was going to be like 4 of these climbs, and whistling down this descent. I'd never been down anything like that. I mean, I'd ridden the Dandenongs, but that was about it. I didn't do the Dolphin. I hadn't ridden the Dauphiné or anything like that. My job at the tour was basically, there was a domestic, so I wasn't there to do reconnaissance. I didn't do any pre-race reconnaissance or anything like that. So we get to the bottom of the second climb, and once again, it was straight to the bottom, then straight up the next climb, I don't know, Col d'Aspin or something like this. And yeah, I had to bridge up. All these little gaps were opening up, and we get over the top and down the other side, just bloody white knuckled it down these descents. Like, you see how good the bikes are then. I mean, we didn't know anything else. We used to bikes not being, you'd grab a handful of brakes and barely anything happened. So, it was a learning experience, on the job, I guess, how to descend, keeping up with these guys. So we get to the bottom of the third climb. Pretty good. I don't know. Just I didn't know what these mountains are. Just bloody big mountains. They're all 15, 20 k's long, and they call them first category or category. It was all the same to me, just bloody pain and discomfort. So, but anyway, so we get to the bottom of this, it was actually the penultimate climb, the third and second last climb. And I started recognizing some of the riders around me because there's only like 50 guys left. And riders are still getting shelled, I was riding up beside guys like Bernard Hinault, won the Tour de France a few years previous. And, younger guys like Croix Criclion and Lucien Van, guys who I had posters of in my wall back in Australia next to the great John Tabarro. and I couldn't believe I was, not only riding at the same race as these guys, but up there in the pointy end when as the field's thinning out. So we got the end of towards the top. We're like in the last 2 kilometres of this penultimate climb, and my director comes up in the car, Maurice Demure, quite a respected personality in the director peloton. Came up and he goes, Phil, where's Jean Rene? I go, oh yeah, that's right, our humble leader. Said, I haven't seen him. I'm sort of looking up the road. There's only like 15 guys in front of me, and I'm looking over my shoulder. And I'd say, listen, I'll ease back. He might be just back there. And he says, no, shit, he's like in the 4th group. He's like 3 or 4 minutes down. I said, oh, geez, I can take a bit of a rest, but there's only 1 climb left. I can ease back. How's he doing? He said, oh, he's having a bad day, but you were meant to be with him today. And I said, oh, it's a bit late to be reminding me, but yeah, okay. He said, come back and see me after the finish, And I thought, oh, Jesus, bloody getting spanked here. So go down this, this last descent, and we get to the bottom of the last climbs. It says only 15 guys left, and there's a flurry of attacks at the bottom. Lucien Van Imp goes up the road. Bernard Hinault, my hero. Bernard Hinault was wearing the polka dot jersey at the stage, but he was world champion at that stage at that year. He's world champion. Turns to me, the kid from Hawthorn, the biggest hill he's ever seen at Glenferrie Road, and turns to me and just for me to chase bloody, Lucien Van Imp, the Belgian champion, chase him down. And, there was no way, I sort of put a couple of pedal strokes in, but I sort of eased up and, and let take the lead. And he tacked, and I sort of struggled up to him. And I think there's, Cork Rickion was still there. Bechtier was still there. There's a few other riders there. But, once I chased down Hinault again, there was only Hinault and myself left. And Lucien Van Imp was still up the road. He was on his way to winning that stage. So yeah, Bernard Hinault and I, basically rode that last climb together, and went for the sprint for second place.
Before you go, before you get to the finish there, you're leaving out. I love the little story about the can of Coca-Cola. Tell that story.
Well, yeah, I've never ridden anything like this before, and I noticed on the climb before, riders, it was a warm day, and once we got above the clouds, the air was getting a bit thinner, and I noticed the riders would they'd be handed up drinks from the side of the road, and and they'd pass it across the peloton. Somebody would have a frosty bloody, big Vittel bottle of water, and they'd take a swig and pass it to the next rider, and it would sort of go across until finally it got tossed out the other side, an empty bottle. And so, I noticed this a little bit, but of course I was still a few rows back from the front, so I never got a drink. Finally, on that last climb, there's still a few of us left. I was on the right-hand side of the road and noticed somebody holding out a frosty Coke, can of Coke. And as I approached, they could see I was reaching out. They cracked the top. They handed it to me. And I was about to take a swig. And I looked over the guy next to me, who was this guy, Bernard Hinault. And, he was a bloody hero of mine. So I thought, oh, look, visitors first, which possibly meant I should have taken a swig first. But anyway, I offered to Hinault. And he looked at me like, I possibly wasn't a sight for sore eyes at all. I was, my jersey was way too big. I was pretty daggy looking. I think Hinault had thought I was just a person from the bloody crowd. I'd met him a few times before, but I may as well have just been a spectator, dressed up as a huge bloody condom or something. And he looked at me and just knocked that Coke out of my eye and out of my hand, and I saw this Coke just sort of spinning off into the crowd, and I thought, what an asshole. so from there, our relationship didn't get that much better not over the next week or over the next year or two, but anyway, that was my first run-in with Bernard Hinault. But a couple of kilometres later, he possibly wasn't expecting me still be there. In fact, the only person there. Sprinting against him at the finish, maybe 10 kilometres later atop this, the ski resort Plateau. So he got second, I got third, but because the Peugeot team did a good team time trial the day before, that put me in yellow.
So I've heard you say you didn't realise just how important wearing the maillot jaune, the yellow jersey, was at that stage. Oh, well, one little quote I heard you say, oh, good, I don't have to worry about washing my jersey tonight. That's how little it really meant. It didn't take long for you to realise, though, it was much bigger than that.
Yeah, that's right. I remember taking the lead in the Peninsula 3-day tour back in, it would have been 76, 77, and I got the leader's jersey, and I think I had to wash the jersey. I mean, the year previous when I was an amateur, I did reasonably well in as an amateur in France, and won a few small tours, and I got used to the sort of protocol. But yeah, it was. I wasn't prepared for the difference from those amateur races to what was about to happen. Once I'd taken the lead, and possibly because I was like unknown, from a country like Australia, a rider taking the lead, a rider from out of Europe, from a place called Australia, it may as well have been a Martian, somebody coming from outer space, and joining the peloton as a blow-in and taking the lead. People didn't know where Australia was. They didn't know, what it was. They came out with a map of the world. This was on the stage just after I won this. It was in, they used to have this thing, Chacun son tour, which was a kind of like after the game type program they'd have, and they still have a program like that now. It's like a panel show after every stage. And back then, of course, I'd never experienced that. And so they asked me up on the stage, and they didn't know anything about this guy, Phil Anderson. So they were asking me, what sports are there in Australia? And they asked, where is Australia and which part of Australia you're from? And Felix Levitan, who was the organizer of the event, he was actually very curious. He came up on the stage and he was asking me questions. He gave me the microphone, and he had somebody run and grab a map of the world. And of course, they held up this map of the world, and France was in the middle of the map, of course. Just like our atlases back when we were school kids. Australia always took up the first half of the atlas. Well, France was showed that was bigger than any other part of the world. And down in the corner, there was a little the island of Australia, tiny. It may as well have been King Island. And at the point where Australia was in the world, and it was fun and exciting times. Like for me, a big change.
Well, you weren't only just the first Australian; you were the first non-European to ever wear the yellow jersey. That's in 1981, 70 odd editions of the event. The first non-European. So it was a big story.
It was a big step, especially where you see where it is now. Now, riders of many nations have won the Tour de France, but of course won stages of the Tour. So it's really gone to a whole new level now. But yeah, it's a stepping stone to what's become of the sport now, where it's really become a global sport. Back then it was very much French or European, and now it's that was pre-American networks covering it. It was certainly pre-Australia showing it. You just used to have the French and the Italians. A splintering of maybe Spanish, and actually the Colombians came in 82, and from there it hasn't looked back.
So before we move on, when you finished that stage, your team manager had said, when you cross the line, you come and talk to me. How did that conversation go?
Yeah, well, if he actually said, you come to my room tonight, and if somebody said that now to you, you'd have him reported. But no, he was very excited for me, and Jean Rene did come to me later in the day, and was very polite, and just said that he was glad that I took my initiative that day, because he was having a bad day and I wouldn't have helped, but also that day basically launched my career into another hemisphere.
Exactly. So you finished 10th overall in that first tour. And then you only had the yellow jersey for the one day, because the day after that was a time trial, and Hinault was the best in the world at that. So he managed to rip it off you. So you only got to wear it. You didn't even get to wear it in the peloton that first year, did you?
No, that's right. But actually, it's funny, that time trial was in Po. That time trial the next day, so I wore the yellow in the time trial. And they talk about the power that getting a yellow jersey, or maybe a rainbow jersey, the power that gives you once you get that. And I keep giving references to the to the Peninsula 3-day tour, but I remember as a junior winning the junior time trial championship. This was under Ted Sanders' wing. Winning that time trial by 1 second, and but they talk about the power that yellow jersey gives you. Okay, now I got the yellow jersey. I had a great day in the mountains. Get to the start line in Po, and I remember Ted's words of wisdom, where he was telling me, Phil, you got to concentrate on, don't think about anything else other than, putting the power through the bike onto the road. Don't be distracted by the crowds, or, what you're going to do after the stage, or, protocol or anything. Just power, concentration. That's what you need in a time trial. And so it's difficult when you're in the yellow jersey, of course. My biggest distraction was making sure I didn't ride off the side of the ramp and crash into the crowd and going down on the start line, in the yellow jersey. But anyway, I, as I was riding, I was remembering Ted's words, which was, I guess, a distraction in itself, but, the concentration. And but still, I put in a gallon effort and got third in that time trial. It was only a 20 or 25 kilometre time trial, but still, for a kid from to come from the last page of the results the day before into the yellow jersey, and then giving it a crack in the time trial and coming third. I think it comes down to the power of of what that yellow jersey can give you. And I think if you speak to anybody that's had the yellow jersey in the Tour de France, or probably be any event, they would talk about that. They would talk about that extra strength that gives you.
Yes, well, we've seen it over many years, of course, especially last year with that great effort by a Frenchman. His name escapes me right now. But he hung on till just 2 days to go with that power of the yellow jersey. Alaphilippe. How can we forget him?
Yes,
what a great performance
the time trial he won was in Po last year, and that surprised, that blew everybody away, because he's not considered a time trialer, but he had the yellow jersey, and everybody thought he was going to be minutes behind, but he won the time trial.
Well, exactly, and they kept counting down the days where he would lose it, and he kept on to it, and then until finally, in the last few days of Tour de France, people were starting to think, hey, maybe he won't. Well, he did in the end, but it was an amazing performance. But the next year in 82, there's a lot more than European season than just Tour de France, but we're talking about the Tour at the moment. So the next year, you did a much even stronger. So you were in yellow for a little bit longer.
Yeah, I won the stage in Nancy, which is northeastern France, and that was on day 2. Then we had the prologue. I think I still did reasonably. I think I got 4th in the prologue, and then on day 2, I don't know if it was stage 1 or stage 2, won the stage in Nancy, and then got the yellow jersey and held it for like another 10 days through the whole north of France and over the cobbles to Roubaix and all the way down to the Pyrenees. So that sort of, that kind of possibly, although the year before I'd got 10th and had the white jersey for most of the tour, I think, that second tour in 82 really sort of put me on the, on the record books that I was a potential tour winner and contender at least.
Yeah, and you finished 5th, and you won the white jersey in that second year as well. So a lot of the experts were predicting that you were a future Tour de France winner.
Yes, yeah, I think. I think those results, of course, like you say, the tour is only one event, and back then we used to race everything, not just tours, but the classics and throughout. But yeah, certainly my results from that second tour and, defending the yellow jersey over, 10 days and still finishing in the top 5, puts you in the standing as a, future potential winner. So
you managed to finish in the top 10 5 times, I think, in the Tour de France, and you got 5th again in one of the other years. But you won nearly 100 bike races, European bike races over that time. You must have had some great rivalries. We saw the rivalry between Hinault and Le Mans, which you were pretty close with Greg, so you would have seen all that. But about yourself, did you have any rivalries like that?
Well, certainly, I spoke just before about Bernard Hinault at the top, going up the Plateau mountain there, and we we never really hit it off. We were competitors, so he was a much better rider than me. Certainly, his results show that, and winning 5 Tour de France's and a World Championship and a host of classics, including Roubaix. Him and I always sort of, I guess we got off on the wrong foot and things didn't really improve. I see him now. I see him at the tour and he came down to Australia the other year, but he still mumbles, he still complains about those years. And possibly, if you're a favourite for the Tour de France, the last thing you want to do in the first 2 weeks is go for little intermediate sprints and have to defend the event until you get to the mountains. They want to save themselves for the time trials and for the mountains. And for me, I was just like a bull at the gate. I was just came back and just attacking and trying to get those bonification sprints. At a time when he was he was the patron of the peloton, and he didn't want this kid from, he didn't even know where Australia was, some this unknown come in and take the limelight away from him, because the French crowd, they were really, I think they like to see somebody challenge the great French champion. He was seen as arrogant by the press, and the way that he behaved sometimes. And I think I brought a certain freshness and, somebody that wasn't locked down by tradition and that historical behavior we'd seen by a lot of other riders. And, I was like, I didn't care. I just came in and was really enjoying myself quite clearly and did whatever it took to try and take back time, try and take advantage of those things. And Greg was a great friend of mine.
I remember he crashed coming into Saint-Étienne, I think it was. I can't remember what year tour. But he had the yellow jersey in the sprint. And he crashed, and I think he had a broken nose. He was a bit of a mess, actually. And he blamed you. Now, you weren't even next to him. It wasn't you, but I think he just had you on his mind. He blamed you for that crash.
Yeah, I remember that stage, actually. It was, it would have been the mid-'80s, maybe 84, 85. I remember, he was under a lot of pressure because Greg LeMond was on his team. And Greg wanted to win the Tour. So they had two leaders, a little bit like the Ineos team, I guess. And so he was under a lot of pressure. And Greg was a good friend of mine. So he was always paranoid that, I was going to be, assisting Greg when I could. I mean, we're all on different, I wasn't on the same team as Greg. So at that stage, I think I was on the Panasonic team. But anyway, I do remember coming into Saint-Étienne that day. And, it was a reduced field, maybe 50 riders. So it was going to be a sprint coming in. It was an uphill finish into Saint-Étienne. And I think it was Steve Bauer opened the sprint. And I jumped across to Steve, he jumped on the right-hand side. And I jumped across to him. And when he accelerated, his back wheel hit one of those cat eyes or a little, little reflector thing in the middle of the road. And his back wheel slid right out and went into my front wheel, and I went down, and he saw me going and thought I was going to get some time on him. So he crashed over the top of me. And so there was like 3 or 4 of us crashed on the road, and I'm lying there and I'm looking over, and I remember telling Rupert Guinness, the journalist from Sydney, about this particular moment, and he's going, "Yes, Phil, then what happened?" He said, Did you offer him a Coke while you were lying there?" But we're sort of lying on the road together, And anyway, I remember getting up and I'd lost a shoe in that crash. Like a shoe had totally gone. One shoe was on my left foot, but my right foot, I looked around, there was no shoe. So I'd actually ride that last couple 100 meters to the finish line with one shoe. No, that was really bizarre. Really bizarre. It's the only time I've ever finished a stage in the Tour de France with one shoe. But anyway, I remember, I was cut up a little bit, scratch here and there, nothing too serious. But I remember getting back to the hotel, and there was a frenzy of journalists waiting at the hotel saying, "Phil Anderson, waiting to interview me." They said, Bernard Hinault is accusing you of taking him out in trying to support your mate Greg LeMond. What have you got to say for that? I said, "What?" I said, I came down in the same crash as Hinault, but there's no way I was going to, take him out. There's possibly better ways to take somebody out than throwing yourself on the road in front of them. But so so that's possibly another reason why and he's still bitter about that. I can't believe it. He still talks about that day, about me taking him down, because he did break his nose and he had a big shiner, and I remember he approached me the day before, the day after, and was banging on about it, and I was just like, I was furious that he think that I'd do something like that.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I'm going to blame you for something now, because when I covered my first Tour de France as a journo with my mate Simon Townley, which was in 91, and it was following you around, of course. And I remember being there when you won the stage into Quimper. But anyway, stage one had a prologue, and first road stage. I probably shouldn't have been exactly where I was. I was too far back in the start of the race. And Bernard Hinault was in charge of the caravan, the convoy, and he's hanging out top of this car with a stick with a circle on the top. And because we're getting too close, he comes up to me and he starts swearing at me in French, so I didn't know what he was talking about. Anyway, he started belting me with this stick. And I reckon it's because he saw the kangaroo on the back of the car, and he thought, "Oh, he's a mate of Phil Anderson. That's probably why he was belting me."
I think that well could be the case.
Now, look, we talk about these great rivalries, and this will be going for 3 hours if we're not careful, because wonderful yarns you're saying, but we haven't only just got the start of your amazing career. But you had a fantastic rivalry with Sean Kelly. You were obviously mates as well. But through the mid-'80s, you were the two best one-day riders in the world. And I reckon, I can't remember, with 85 or 86, you had a brilliant year. You won a lot of races. But he and you were sort of were great rivals, So take us through a bit of that.
Well, yeah, we certainly weren't enemies, but yeah, we always found that where I did have riders that I didn't like, I'd put Bernard Hinault in that category. I would put maybe Audrey van der Poel in that category, maybe Cor Cuchillon in that category, but Kelly, I hard guy to warm to because he's very difficult to understand. In fact, I think I was riding for 2 years before I even knew he was in the peloton because when he speaks English, you can't understand him. Like he spoke, he speaks French mostly with his, with the people that he lives with, and obviously with his team. He was on a French team back then. And, so he speaks this sort of peloton, Englishy, Frenchy sort of language. It's a whole other sort of dialect. Anybody that's listened to his coverage on SBS, not SBS, on Eurosport would have to agree. But Kelly and I, we when you get to the pointy end of a race, it's always like the same usual suspects. It's a little bit different now. In fact, I was thinking last night, now when you look at the end of a race, there could be like 50 riders or, maybe 30 riders who could win a race. Whereas back then you could possibly put them on a set of hands. There could be 10 riders who'd win. It would be the same guys every weekend. There wasn't much of a difference. Like there might be a difference in the Ardennes and what there would be, in Roubaix or something like that. But generally, and when you go to the tours, it wouldn't expand to many more than that. It might be refined a little bit. But yeah, you got to know each other pretty well because you'd be racing against each other every week, pretty much, whether it was tours or the classics. Like we used to race everything, and when we weren't racing for the team, we'd go and do some Kermesse races, for the, to trim your form a little bit, leading into the bigger events. And then you'd see, Sean or, bloody Crawdy would be there or, it was fantastic times back then. But yeah, rivalries, your form would change a little bit from one week to another, but you pretty much got to know each other reasonably well. Not on a personal basis, but certainly on a performance basis. And you could watch their form come up and go down, and just when you think you've got them figured out, they've come out with a cracker weekend and win, 4 races in a week.
Look, you won some of the biggest races, Amstel Gold Race, and a lot of the Hennigerturm, which was the big German classic of those times. But Liège Bastogne, not Liège, which is the king of the Ardennes classics, and probably the race you would think most suited to you. You're on the podium many times. I think you finished second, third, but you didn't win it. And the one year where I reckon you had it on toast, where you were the strongest that day for sure. You went away in the final kilometres with Fignon, but he wouldn't do a turn for you. What was going on there?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I was, pretty frustrated. You'd think you'd be having a good day just to be there because it was sort of towards the end of the day. We'd ridden maybe 240 Ks, so I think we're in the Sartre-Tillman, or it was like the last climb, the second last climb. We'd gone over the one and the Lower Doot and all these ones, and it was basically the last or the second last climb. And I'd attacked and he came with me, and then he just sat there. He just I'd sort of pull over for him to come through, and he'd just sit there even on the downhills, and that was frustrating. By then we had maybe 45 seconds or something like that. It wasn't It wasn't just 10 seconds where I will just ease up and wait for another selection. So yeah, I had to commit, and he just sat there and figured I could beat him in a sprint if I took him to the finish. But in the end, I think Kelly had a bunch of his mates back there chasing. None of them were teammates, but they were his buddies. He always seemed to have mates in the peloton, and you talk about rivalries, and that was possibly, you could see these things happen, even just watching on TV. But when you're 45 seconds up the road, it's pretty hard to know exactly what's going on behind. And they caught us. On the boulevards of Liège, and very frustrating.
But you still ran, and Kelly only just beat you. I mean, you ran second.
Yeah. No, I was having a good day, and in hindsight, great thing. Hindsight, I should have waited, and just given them a serve in the sprint. But from my previous experiences at Liège, it was always won by an attack, and in the closing kilometres, and so that's how I played out.
And Fignon wasn't really the type of rider who would normally do that. He said, I saw in a grab somewhere, he said he was told by his sports director not to work with you because they had another rider just back there. It might have been Hinault, I'm not sure, but someone was back in the next group.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he was on the same team as that at that time, but frustrating time. But for me, once you're sort of over the finish line, all you're thinking about is the next race or the next year or whatever it be.
So the Liège-Bastogne-Liège is probably the king of the classics for the tougher riders, but there's no doubt, as far as the Belgians are concerned, the Tour of Flanders, Ronde van Vlaanderen is the big one. Now, you ran second in it twice, once pipped by your teammate in almost a photo finish. That must have been frustrating for you.
Yes. I lived in Flanders. I dreamt of winning that race and came close a number of times. And it's the worst place to be, second place, I can tell you. But I used to know the roads like at the back of my hand. Literally, I used to train on them all the time, and used to do efforts up the Koppenberg and down the bloody Kutterstraat and all the roads over there. I knew really well, and I think that really sort of gave me the edge, but obviously not quite the edge that was needed to win. But it's a huge event in Belgium. It's the it's like the spring carnival horse races here that time of year in Belgium. It's just crazy and something I love going back to every year.
Yeah, it's the Melbourne Cup, as they say. And the other race that I thought would have suited you was Paris-Roubaix, but it was not something that you fired up for.
No, I never really felt that comfortable on cobbles. Strange. I mean, the cobbles in Roubaix are quite a bit different than Flanders. Flanders, you've got the hills there. It's a different type of selection. And also the calendar was a little bit different back then. You'd have the Gent-Wevelgem would be on a midweek, like on a Wednesday. Then you'd have Flanders. Then you'd have the following weekend after the Flanders, you'd have Roubaix. Then the weekend after that, you'd have Liège-Bastogne-Liège. Whereas now you've got Amstel in there. So my plan most years was on the Roubaix weekend, I'd go training and do reconnaissance in the Ardennes and have a look at the Liège-Bastogne-Liège course. So for me, when there's a heap of guys on the team, especially on French teams or on any team, there's riders who are really eager to do Roubaix. And for me, it wasn't on my wish list. So I'd always, at the start of the year, I'd always make my team knowing that, I'm not Stuart O'Grady. I don't get a hard on for those sort of events. Put those riders there. Put those riders there. The Hank Vogels, who they live and dream, and Heyman. They're champions in Roubaix, and they should get priority. So for me, I always dodge that bullet. I mean, I did like, I don't know, 3 or 4 Roubaix, and was always, I was convinced, I'd done well in Flanders or something the week before, and they say, Phil, come on, if you enter, you'll be favourite, we'll put some money at the bookies and we'll do really well. Oh, geez. But yeah, no, the best I got was, I think I got a top 20, I don't know, 15th or 18th or something like that, one year. But yeah, it wasn't something that was really on my wish list to do. But yeah, I mean, you think now I do a lot of gravel riding and, a bit of mountain biking, and, maybe my skills are better now that suited for that sort of stuff. But still doesn't interest me. And as a spectator, it's a fantastic event, like as an event to win, it'd be huge. But yeah, not my cup of tea.
I was on the start list one year, but I never actually started in it. So there you go. So at least you wrote it. Talking about the other event that suited you was most years was the World Championship. And I remember Eddie Merckx saying to me that he reckons you would have been world champion one year. It was the year that the Criccion won, so in the mid-'80s. And in Barcelona, and you came through the last feed zone and got knocked off by one of the dopes hanging out the bags. Take us through that.
Yeah, look, I remember. I certainly remember going up there and training, down there, I guess, training down on the coast, just out of Barcelona, and doing some preparation there with Greg LeMond and Steve Bauer and Doug Shapiro. And we did, some good training, and, we came to the World Championships, all of us in good form. And, I remember went up the side of Montjuïc with Julia, I think that's what it's called. It's just a hill on the side of Barcelona. It was a pretty hard circuit, but it did suit me. And unfortunately, I got caught up in tangled up in a crash, and landed on my knee. And I don't think I think I just stopped, which is unfortunate because I was in the leading group. But I mean, it was disappointing, but you learn to sort of take these blows and move on. It's not like it's going to be 4 years. It's not like an Olympic thing where you got to wait 4 years before you can get up and do it again. The World Championship is huge, and you're right. I did well in another World Championship as well, but one of the ones where Greg won, but he was superior than me on that day. So something I would have loved to have done. Of course, Cadell has done it since, and it could be done. Maybe if I went in now, I'd come back with more confidence. But I never really went that well on circuit races, to tell you the truth. Whereas now the World Championships, quite often they start in one place and finish like, the one they had here. And I think every year now they've changed the sort of format a bit. But, circuit races, I think the element of surprise was always better for me on a to B, or a, more sort of a stage race, or even classics, not knowing exactly what's around the next corner. But if you do laps and laps of something like a World Championships, I never really did that well in those sort of events.
It's funny, because Eddie Merckx, I was lucky enough to be having dinner with him, and we were just talking about things in Australia and whatever, and he made the point of bringing that up. So it wasn't something I was talking about you or anything. He said, I can tell you, and he's pretty strong on this. He said that year Phil Anderson would have won the World Championship. He didn't say he could have. He said because he's a very good judge, and he was looking at everyone come out and the strength of the riders and what he reckons you would have won that day. So that was a nice thing for him to say anyway.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, especially since it was ultimately it was a Belgian that ended up winning there in Corey Crickey.
Maybe he doesn't like Cricky on. I don't know, but that's not how he operates. But so I'll just go back again. As I mentioned, I was lucky enough. My first Tour de France was one of getting towards the end of your career in 1991, and you won into Quimper, and I remember in a breakaway, and I was the first. You came across the line, and I was one of the first journos standing, and you came straight to me, which was great. And I think I swore, and it got on the international television. But it was must have been exciting because that ended up being your last Tour de France stage win.
Yes, that's right. It was, I mean, I've only won 2 stages, so it was the first and the last stage that I've won in the Tour de France, one in 81 one in 82, and then one in 91. That's right. So, it was huge. It was my first year. I'd just come from TVM team onto the Motorola team, and I was having a good season. I won a heap of races, right from the beginning of the year. And Motorola had only committed for that as a sponsor of the South Club team, formerly the 7-Eleven team. They only committed for a year. And then after that stage win and then the success that we'd had in that tour, because Andy Hampston went on to win a stage on Alpe d'Huez, Motorola came in and committed for another 3 or 4 years. In fact, stayed on board in cycle sport until about 96. So, it was great to be part of that, part of that decision making from Motorola, that commitment coming on board. But yeah, so for me, it was huge. I was early 30s, and I'd done a heap of Tour de France's, I did 13 in the end, and but after my 4th Tour de France, I came down with an arthritic condition, which really, after that illness, my tour performances were never really that good. Not in the Tour de France, in stages in the Giro and won a heap of other races. But as far as the Tour de France, there was a big drop off in my results. But then come to 91, new team. It was it really spurred me on, and the new colours and the results I was coming, that I was returning. It was a great year and great memories, and of course seeing you at the finish with your localism, you bloody beauty.
I think there might have been an F word got in there as well, but anyway, we won't go there.
Yeah, I think there was an F-bomb. I think there was an F-bomb in typical Leafy fashion.
But you touching on Motorola there, I was going to ask you about all the different teams, but Motorola, of course, Lance Armstrong was the crazy Texan. What was it like in those real early days with a young Lance who was about to go into the stratosphere?
Yes. He was a young kid that came on board. I'd seen him at the Tour de Pont. He was like on the national team at that stage, and the director or the manager of the team, Jim Okowicz, came to me and said, "What do you think about having this young guy on the team?" And I didn't seem to have any problem with him coming on. They said he was a triathlete, and so obviously he would have been a good time trialer. He was young. He was only like 18 at that stage. By the time he came into the team, I think he was 19, and an enthusiastic young guy. And first met him, or got on to meet him at the training camp we had in Santa Rosa. That would have been 92. And he was only riding a light program because he was still doing some stuff with the national team, and he was really, I think the team Motorola just wanted to sort of nurture him along as a junior. And Yeah, I think he came over and he rode San Sebastian. It would have been in '92, which is a classic, like normally the week after the Tour de France. And I was in Ireland about to start the Tour of Ireland. Lance flew in. He'd just done he'd just done San Sebastian, and he always wanted a room with me. You know, I was like the old dog. And he says, "Oh, Phil, I'm shattered, mate. That bloody San Sebastian." I said, "How'd you go?" He said, "I came last." Like they were packing up when he finally got to the finish line. And you know, and he was a great help. I think I went on to win the Tour of Ireland that year, so he's really good teammate. But then the next year in '93, he came back and he won. He won at San Sebastian. So in 12 months, he turned things around. And of course, in '93, he also won the World Championship. So. You know, pre-cancer days, he was a great athlete, and you know, it was you know, an exciting rider to watch in those early days. So much enthusiasm, and you know, you come up to a race and you'd really have to hold him back because he just wanted to give everything in the first 10 kilometres. You know, you sort of no, just the wait. You know, you just sort of. He'd come by every 5 minutes asking, you know, "Oh, can I attack now? Can I attack now?" And I said, no. What do we talk about? You know, he's talked about, you know, we've got a couple of boys who are going to put in some efforts in the closing kilometres, and you wait, and then you go, but not yet. So, yeah, of course, it was very disappointing to see where he ended up. You know, the direction he took it post cancer, and some said prior to cancer, he's already on that path, which is you know, terrible to hear. But yeah. He has a good podcast too. I'm sure you've listened to him.
I have.
John.
I'm sure he'll listen to us. So I'm going to ask you the question: did you see any signs of Lance going down that dark road from those early days?
No, certainly not. You know, he joined us, said, you know, as a kid, he really came on board in '93 as a full-time rider on the Motorola team, and we pretty much, you know, he was, where was he living? I think he was living in Italy, and then he moved down south of France, sort of moved around a little bit, but no, I certainly didn't see anything, you know, that he became. No signs of it. You know, I knew we had a team meeting. It would have been my last year, '94. At the start of the season, it was in I think it was Torino Adriatico, an event there, and we had a team meeting, and you know, we were like nowhere out. The Motorola team was nowhere to be seen. The race was just like a strung out line every day. And, you know, the director would, you know, we were starting to use radios by this time. And, you know, the director would say, "Phil, get the riders to the front." And we couldn't even step out into the wind. We're going so fast. And this is basically from the start of the stage to the finish. It was just like a single line. You know, the Italians were just drilling it in the front. And so I remember having a meeting towards the final days, and a team meeting with all the riders. Like, you know, we'd have a meeting every day before the stage, and you know, they were talking about this new product which was coming into the peloton called EPO, and the question was whether that was the reason why the speed was coming up, because you know, it was evidently that the average of the stages was going up. And but anyway, the question was, well, firstly, is, you know, did we think that's what it was? And like, we didn't know, but obviously there was a change in the pace. And then secondly was the question is what we're going to do about it. And you know, and we all agreed that we didn't want anything to do with it. Like, for me, it was easy because it was my last year, and I certainly wasn't going to support going on any EPO program or anything like that. But no, and so for the rest of that year, we basically were satisfied with just not getting the results, or not getting great results. You just being in a single line every day, just getting our asses handed to us. So, but yeah, I didn't see any sign of anybody in our team, in that era. I mean, I was maybe naive, and possibly people would say, "Oh, Phil, you got no idea. How could you, get your head in the sand?" But I always believed those people around me, and it's still that way now. Not just in regards to illicit drugs, but I always was brought up to believe in those people around you, being truthful to you and being straight shooters. And obviously there's a few people out there with curved barrels on their end of the guns where the shot wasn't quite so as straight as it should have been. But there's been a few people that have been proved that were proved wrong, and Phil Liggett would be in that category. Paul Sherwin and myself, and maybe you too, John. But I was always believed that he was a clean rider. I guess I wanted to believe in the comeback kid.
Yeah. And look, it's a terrible era of our great sport. And as you say, you were at the beginning of it. It continued to get worse. The EPO era. But, in some ways, Lance finally admitting to it was the catalyst for a big change in the sport. And cycling, I think, now is probably cleaner than it's ever been. So it's been an amazing turnaround. But look, I thought we'd also touch on, you were a bit of an innovator too. You're in those early days. I can remember Shimano used you as the test pilot as they developed the STI system. Before that, everyone had to lean down to change gears down on the frame. They brought in in the 80s what they call STI, where the brake lever was also the gear lever, and you were actually testing that out for them, and with the first rider, it was the first rider to actually use it.
Yeah, well, a lot of these componentry and frame bike builders, they use the access they have to their teams that they support, to test out products. It's the same in all sports. So I was on the when I was with Panasonic. We used Campagnolo, and at that stage, so this is the mid-'80s, Shimano was just starting to get into competition, and they come out with the Durace group set. Until then, they'd had the 600 group set, and Greg, a good friend of mine, Greg Lamont, he was using Shimano, and I looked at the stuff he was using, the indexing gear levers, and some of their other innovations, and thought I'd love to give it a try. So when I went to TVM, I asked that I requested that they talk to Shimano about getting them on board to support the team, and so they came on board. And of course, Shimano heard about my enthusiasm for the brand. I mean, I was just curious, but they read that as enthusiasm, and approached me and asked me if I would be interested in testing some of their pre-production stuff or some of their prototype gear. So they actually sent some of the technicians over from Japan to come and stay where I was living in Belgium, and I used to go out with these prototypes, levers and products, and it was great. It was very exciting, and the thought of being able to ride without having to take your hands off the bars, I didn't know it would be ever come to fruition, but obviously it made a huge impact on the sport, the change. And I remember the early days when I was like the only guy in the peloton that had them, and climbing up little bergs in England and the Tour of Britain, or up in Denmark and places I was racing, to see the other riders, have to take their hands off. So they have to, if you're sprinting or if you're climbing, you'd have to sit. You couldn't stand and change gears. So if you were climbing, you'd have to sit down on the seat, reach down, take your hand off the bars, change gears, back up on the bars and stand up again. So it was like, it was a huge benefit to be able to keep your hands on the bars and change gears. So possibly, it was unfair, I guess. I was using some of the early stuff in races, and they helped me win a couple of events. So an unfair advantage, but Shimano have always been great to work with, and see where they are now with the Di2 group sets, and they've just gone ahead in leaps and bounds, and the whole the equipment that's in use now is just unbelievable. If that would have been available back in our day, possibly be a lot more riders still racing.
So interesting, Phil, that you're talking about the STI. I remember a really good story written by Alan Piper, who was writing some nice little yarns. He was riding with you in Panasonic, and you're in Tour of Flanders, and he was a bit of a traditionalist. He said, I'm not going with that. I'm going to stick with the old down bar levers. And you were climbing the Mur, where the race was being decided, and the front group had gone off. You were chasing the leaders, and he was chasing you over the top. And he said, in 3 gear changes, that gap opened. You got on, and I think you might have run second, and he never got there. And he said the next week he had the STI on.
It was a big advantage. Like I said, not have to take your hands off the bars. You could lose precious time. Like quite often you win it. You can lose a race in a decision, a split second decision, or one moment. When you try and analyze how you won a certain event, which you usually do after a win or a loss, I guess. It can be a very small thing, and something like the STI levers is major. It was a real game changer, and you wouldn't see anybody using any of that old stuff now, because everything's electronic. But back then it was a monumental shift and way that we rode.
Now we've this has been a great chat, and a lot of people wouldn't realise that once you turn pro in 1980, the only race you ever raced in Australia until you retired in, I think, 95 was the Bay Crits. That's right.
You twisted my arm, as you so well know how to do. But it was. I know you used to approach me just about every year, but I knew it was possibly going to be my last year, and so I thought, well, because we were pretty good mates back then, I thought, well, I'll come on board and do the race. I said, don't expect too much, because the season's a lot different now than what it used to be. But back then I'd been training for maybe 6 weeks coming into your event, and a lot of the field were riders who were racing the track, like a lot of track riders, and so I knew I wouldn't have a chance in the sprints, like a lot of fast boys out there. And so for me, it was it was good. I remember winning a stage around Bowen Edge. Oh no, Ocean Grove. That's right. Ocean Grove. That's right. Yeah. So it had a it was great. It would have been a big regret if I didn't ride at least one event in Australia, and because it's all different now. We used to race a lot. Once the season started, you'd race like 110 or 120 days a year, whereas now, they're not even doing 100. They're like doing 80 or 60, or, some riders less than 60 days of racing a year. So, the riders aren't fresh. Back then, by the time I got back to Australia, because I know, you tried to assist, get me on board to do the Sun Tour. By the time I got home to Australia at the end of the season, in October or November, I was just on my knees. I just needed some time off the bike. Take 4 weeks off the bike, and then slowly sort of ease back into it. And it wasn't on my to-do list. 500-meter circuits around Geelong foreshore and things like that. You know, you're
Well,
sort of,
we did try hard to
heartbreaking.
get you for the Sun Tour as well. I remember going up a special meeting at the Jamison pub with a couple of the big knobs from the Herald Sun, but we just couldn't get it across the line. But I'd just like to touch on one thing, because we mentioned up there at Lacola or Jamison, Simon Gerrans. Now, you were very instrumental in the beginning of Simon Gerrans' career. He was your neighbour up there in Jamison. Just take us a little bit through that story.
Yeah, well, I just knew him as a young kid, like a neighbour's son. Nice family, the Gerrans family. So there were 3 sons. Simon was the youngest, and he was always knocking around on the motorbike. You know, like he'd come up to my place on the dirt bike, and you know, he'd be racing dirt bikes as a junior, and you know, he was very good. But you know, he had a couple of bad crashes on the motorbike and buggered his knee and needed reconstruction of it. And so he came to me to give him a recommendation of who to see. And I think I gave Peter Larkin, the surgeons. You know, he does footballs and all that sort of stuff, and he'd done a shoulder of mine. So I recommended him for his family to go and consult. And yeah, and in the rehabilitation for his knee, he had to just, you know, first he got you in the pool because he had reconstruction of the knee. And then once he was out of the pool, then on the bike a little bit. So, you know, he obviously knew I had a collection of bikes, so I lent him one of my bikes and enjoyed that and started racing a little bit. And, you know, we all, his dad, his mum too, and the family, we used to knock around a bit together. We'd do triathlons together. We'd have, you know, teams and individuals and stuff like that. We'd go over the pool in Benalla. Imagine driving 100 kilometres to go swim in a 25-metre pool. But anyway, yeah, that's what we used to do. But anyway, yeah, so Simon liked, you know, riding his bike and racing, and we tried to get a Mansfield club up and going, but we didn't have the numbers back then to, you know, to get a licence for to start a club. So I took him down to Melbourne. I remember, you know, and he's still on one of my old bikes. I think it was a Trek. It was a bike which Le Mans gave me, actually, one of his Le Mans bikes. And we took him down to Sandown to race there. He used to have weekly races down there, I think on a Wednesday night or something like that. And I remember him, you know, bidding him farewell at the start, and he went over and did these laps. And, you know, every time he came past, I was looking where I was and say, no, you know, put your head down, concentrate, don't look at me, look at what's going on in the race, what's the wheels, blah, blah, blah. You know, he's still only 16 years old. And anyway, I remember, you know, the big bunch came past one lap to go, and they come back and they come to the finish, and where we were waiting was actually after the finish line, and the riders all came in 1s and 2s, and then there was a big gap, and I went over and said, oh, what happened in the race? And he said, oh, there was this huge crash, you know, there was that young kid you brought along, Gerrans, huge, you know, he went from one side of the road to the other and created this huge crash, you know. So Gerrans and Anderson took off back to Mansfield again with our head between our knees. Pretty sorry for ourselves. But, yeah, so that was you know, one of the first races he did. But obviously, you know, I think then he got under Dave Sanders' wing with a VIS and you know, got a big help from him, and you know, eventually in the AIS, and went over to Europe, did a couple of stints there, came back, got back onto a club over there in Brittany, and yeah, you know, he
took his own path, didn't he? I mean, he did it the hard way. He didn't have you know, the easy path. He raced in France. He even went to Norway for a little while. All strange things, yes. And then before it all clicked. Yeah. Like he didn't do it easy in those early days, that's for sure. You know, I think he did a season with the AIS. It was a bit different then. I think they'd go over for a few months and come back, and I think he did a stint or a couple of stints with them. But in the end, they had to let him go because, you know, he wasn't coming up with the results, or he wasn't sort of,
he wasn't progressing in the direction that the AIS wanted at that stage. So he found a club in Brittany, and and that helped. Or there could have been that club up in Norway first, but eventually he got a footing in France, and eventually onto French Leisure, I think, before Credit Agricole. But anyway, yeah. But he certainly, like, he was an okay rider. I only remember him as a kid back here, but certainly excelled. Anything I thought he could have ever achieved in his career, and I think Dave Sanders would have to say the same. I mean, after the problem with his knee, I think one leg is like, more than a centimetre shorter than the others. And I remember Davo coming to me saying, this kid would just about qualify, for the disabled games. He's such a handicap that he has. But he certainly took it to another level, and it ended up getting some results is incredible. To win Liège, Bastogne-Liège, and stages of the Tour, the Vuelta, and the Giro, and has led every race there is. What a stellar career.
And he won Liège, Bastogne-Liège, which you just didn't do. So there you go.
That's right. Yeah. No, he's just so suited to the same sort of events, I guess. Amstel, he did well. And he figured well in the World Championships, of course, too. I think he got a silver, second, bronze there.
Yeah, second. Yeah. Dave Sanders actually said one time, if there's ever a nuclear explosion, the first thing that'll crawl out will be the cockroaches, and the second thing will be Simon Gerrans. So that's where he puts him. But
survivor.
Great career. And also, you were around for the early stages of Cadel Evans. I can remember when Cadel was a mountain biker, but he came out and won that the Tour of Tassie with a great ride up Mount Wellington. You were in the car with Phil Liggett, and I was in the race director's car right next to you, and we were on the front. And Cadel was just riding away. And I think it's when Phil came out with that famous saying, "This kid could win the Tour de France," which he dines on now. But who was to know what he would do, eh?
Yeah, no, that was a big surprise. I remember him doing your event, actually. I think I remember him doing the Bay Series, actually, in those early days. And at that stage, he was a mountain biker. So I think you had a team or a troop. It could have been like the AIS mountain bike team. They're doing, some cross training and doing some criteriums. And, they're like that. I remember this one criterium of the series around the botanical gardens there, and of course I think they still had some, the roads are pretty pocked up there, or you had speed bumps and things like that, and of course the mountain bikers were just bunny hopping those things like they weren't there. But you could see in those early days that he could be a champion. Certainly the way that he went up Mount Wellington that day, and I was actually running the team there in the Bay Series, for Davo, I think it was. I've done a few favours for Davo over the years, and that was one of them. And and Cadel was on the team, and he did exceptionally well winning that stage and overall. But to see where he took it. I mean, at that stage, he was only just sort of had his foot in the door on the road. So, to see where he took his career, took him a few years to, reap the results. You could see there were flashes of talent there for sure. But you got to remember, this is after a fantastic career as a mountain biker. So, if he hadn't even done road racing, he was already a champion in mountain biking before his road career started. So, obviously, got some genetic, some advantages there over a lot of other riders, and obviously a great rider.
Yes, well, he's our only rider to win the Tour de France and the World Road title, of course. And because of that, I put him at number one. But, gee, I'll tell you what, Phil, I've got to say, you're very close behind it at number two. And I put Gerrans in the top 3 or 4 as well, because you've had a connection with all of them. We'll finish it up now, mate. It's been absolutely sensational. I won't go into about all the things you've been doing since retiring. You like me, July would be in France right now. It's my first July in Australia for 22 years. So it'd be something like that for you, I guess. And you've hosted many trips to Tour de France, and you are still doing. Do you think you'll be back next year at the tour?
Oh, who knows how long this COVID situation is going to be, ruling our roost, and it's frightening, really, to think that we thought a month ago that we're in the clear, but here we all are now, with all these restrictions, and I couldn't imagine being on the other side of the world. We can't even, country Victoria, it's fine, the same for you, but if you're in Melbourne, you can't. You've got to justify going out your front door, let alone riding a bike on the other side of the world or hosting people. But yeah, tourism is changing as well. I think group travel is I think cycle travel, like what we do, has changed a lot over the last decade, and fortunately, I'm pretty much retired from that. We live in changing times, and I think the last thing people want to do is jump in a van or a bus with a bunch of people they're not that familiar with in confined spaces. I think COVID is just the new normal is going to be different for tour operators or anybody that's engaged in travel. With masks, and hopefully that vaccine will come along and we can get back to the old normal. But for me, I think it's going to be a while until that happens.
All right, mate. Well, look, thanks heaps for coming on board. We've set a new record, and it's all too good to chop any out. So it's going to be a 2-hour podcast, which is absolutely fantastic. Thanks, mate. I look forward to heading down to sunny Apollo Bay shortly and getting out for a pedal with you. See you, mate.
I look forward to that, mate. It'd be good to see you out on the bike again.